Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the official New York Energy Week Natural Gas Breakfast. My name is Emily Bjorklund. I'm the CMO at EnerKnol, the company behind New York Energy Week. On behalf of the entire EnerKnol team, I want to personally thank you for joining us here this morning. It is a unique and humbling experience to have so many leaders here in the same room to help us kick off New York Energy Week 2014. Before we continue, I'd like to invite you to join in the discussion on Twitter using the NYEW hashtag. And also, please download the New York Energy Week 2014 mobile app. There are instructions in your New York Energy Week book if you'd like to. For those of you we haven't met yet, EnerKnol is an energy data company based here in New York. We provide cross-sector energy participants with regulatory and policy data. You can meet the rest of the team and test drive our software in the room where the breakfast is, at our demo table. We launched New York Energy Week last year to stimulate collaboration and investment in the often fragmented and siloed energy industry. Last year, we had close to 2,000 participants in our inaugural year, and this year we expect double that at the 12 headline events going on this week and the additional 20 affiliate events going on throughout the week. Before I hand it over to our host, I'd like to first thank our founding sponsor, NYSERDA, our brand partner, the Energy Agency, this year's Terawatt sponsors, Con Edison and Breitling Energy, who we are pleased to have here represented on the panel today, our board of directors, especially Peter Gardette, who is moderating today's panel, our steering committee, especially Alex Zimmerman and Doug Gallagher, who you've probably seen around greeting you this morning. Finally, I'd like to thank our event host, CME Group, whose leadership in the energy markets is evidenced by having all of you, the leaders in the energy industry, here this morning. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Gary Morshes, the Managing Director for Global Energy at CME Group.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Do I have slides here? Or? Okay. I got a big, long slideshow that I'm going to bore you with. No, not really. Anyways. Welcome. Thank you for joining us here today. We're proud to be a sponsor with this group. I mean, we are energy. I'll just do this without the slides just to keep things moving along. But, you know, if you talk about the NYMEX has been around for many years, but really focused as the major risk management place, you might say, the major risk management exchange in global energy for many, many years. Again, purchased by the CME Group, joined the CME Group in 2008. And if you think about it, you may not know this, but we are, you know, really committed to providing our customers. What do we need in exchange for? Why are we around? We're here to provide liquidity. We're here to provide that liquidity to allow customers to shed or take on risk in the global energy markets. We have over 1,200 energy products around the world. You all know about our WTI, you all know about our heating oil and our RBOB, which are our main benchmarks that get a lot of play. But we have 1,200 products around the world, from power to LNG to gas, oil, emissions, coal, you name it, it's on the CME. We provide that activity, those products, those services to allow customers, again, to shed risk or to take on risk in these volatile energy markets. We trade about 1.5 million contracts a day. Our open interest is over 29 million contracts. So the industry, the world votes with their feet by exchanging or trading on our exchange. We have distribution over 85 countries. And the things that we bring are really our flexibility of execution. A lot of you folks have probably been in this building, go to the floor over the years. And the floor has changed. We still have a floor. We think it's important to allow customer choice to execute on the floor. But we also have other venues to allow people to gain that access, that liquidity. We have Globex, our electronic trading platform, CME Direct, that also allows folks to get into our central limit order book that way. We have Clearport, which allows folks to use brokers to broker these maybe less liquid products, to rely on a broker, those advantages, and again, trade and clear those through the CME Group, through the NYMEX. So we have, a CEF, we have central counterparty clearing, we have flexibility of execution, again, allowing you, the customer, to access this liquidity in the ways you want. Integrity is job one with us too. We've got transparency, we have defined products, defined rules. Anyone and everyone can go there and look at them. And managing that integrity is probably the single most important thing we do day in and day out. We're price agnostic, we don't take positions, we're not traders. Yet we provide that avenue, we provide that forum, we provide that marketplace to allow folks to come in there eyes wide open and feel confident that they, again, can shed or take on the risk they want to hedge any price risk, basis risk, location risk they may have in their portfolio. Our portfolio is truly global. I mentioned 1,200 products plus, but we really serve about 15 separate markets. You look at the nat gas market in North America, it's a lot different than the nat gas market in Europe. It's a lot different than the Asian LNG markets. Now, there's talk, and we believe that nat gas will go global as LNG is exported and infrastructure is built into place. But right now, it's fragmented. Hence, we've got to serve these markets. Oil markets are much more global, but there are certainly regional differences, as you well know about. So I just want to say, we're here to really serve the customers, serve the market, serve the world with energy risk management products and services. That's how we started. We're going to continue to do that going forward. So with that, we'll keep this program moving here and everything like that. But I want to thank EnerKnol and their team for hosting New York Energy Week again this year. And again, we're proud to be a part of it. We've been a part of it last year, this year, and we'll continue to be a part of it. This is important. It's important to us. It's important to the industry. And I'm going to move this thing forward and hand this over to Peter Gaudet to keep this program going. Thank you all.
Good morning. Thank you for showing up so early to this, the kickoff of New York Energy Week. Our official opening ceremony is tonight, but this is really the start of an exciting year, and it's the start of my second year of involvement here. And I am always particularly pleased that we include an oil and gas event in New York Energy Week. The perception is often that New York is not an oil and gas hub, and as someone who grew up in the oil business, I feel that that's a mistake. It ignores the history. For many years, the center of what the world's largest oil company was on Wall Street, right here, Standard Oil of New Jersey, that became ExxonMobil. We just heard from Gary about the amazing number of contracts that are still traded in this very building. New York still is a crossroads for the oil and gas business, even when it's hard for us to see that on a daily basis. So that's one of the reasons I'm just always glad to be able to feature a lot of the local leaders and kind of national leadership, and to be able to welcome a real oil and gas company to New York Energy Week this year. So all of you have doubtlessly heard of the shale revolution. As Foreign Affairs says, it's a big fracking deal. And when we were thinking about how to do this panel, the most relevant thing that occurs to a lot of people is the oil to gas conversion market here in New York City. But I actually wanted to take it out a little bit. We'll address the oil to gas conversion market a little bit, but I also think that it's important to put that in context to get a sense of the enormous scale of the changes that are going on in the industry and what that means for all of us individually and as a community. So I'm kind of approaching this from the idea that there's two stages to this revolution. There's the innovation and impact stage that we're living through today. The kind of hydraulic fracturing and all of the technology innovation that's gone along with that continues to happen. And we've really already felt its impact. A large reason that the U.S. economy has not been in even worse shape over the past decade has been because natural gas has been so cheap, right? And the changes in forecasts for what that means for the U.S. as an energy leader have been totally transformative. So we're living through the innovation and impact stage, but we're moving now to an implementation and integration stage, a stage in which decisions will be made about the future of the energy sector in the US. When we were putting together this panel, I wanted to get people who could address every part of that decision-making process, all the way from the wellhead through pipelines to trading and finance, and also even the academy and kind of that consensus formation as well, the public affairs piece. So without further ado, instead of running through and having everyone kind of tell you about where they went to college and how many kids they have, I'm just going to start in all of the backgrounds of our speakers and who they are and what they talk about is on your paperwork. So feel free to refer to that. We're going to go until about 9:15, and then I'll open it up for some questions. So please keep in mind any questions you may have for our panel as they're speaking. We really want this to be a community event. So I'm going to start really broadly. The US has really set the pace for the oil and gas revolution. We've turned from being just the world's largest energy importer, spending trillions of dollars every year in accounted for and unaccounted for costs when it comes to importing energy, to being one of the world's top producers of fossil fuels, right? So my question really is that we can now take for granted. We're now a big producer. In this new reality, what are the threats to this position? We know that China, Poland, a lot of other countries are examining their own shale resources. And I'd like to start with Chris Faulkner from Berkeley. You've actually been in China. I know the New York Times quoted you on some of your China involvement and in helping China access some of their shale and face their issues. And I'm interested to know both an update on that, on what's going on there, and also what kind of threats you see to the US's kind of preeminent position in the shale revolution.
All right. So, there's not many countries in the world that have the opportunities that we have as far as resources and all of the parts, the moving parts that make this possible in the United States. So when you go to China, they have the same issues we've had. They have access to water challenges. They don't have enough equipment. They've drilled 64 shale gas wells in the Sichuan Basin over the last 18 months. They're not producing any gas for shale currently because they have infrastructure challenges in those areas. So what you find is that people look to the United States as, there's a revolution taking place, but there's also the evolution that took place of, 20 years of work that went into it. So it didn't happen overnight, but folks look to us as sort of the benchmark of the shale revolution when we are. But you also have to look at the fact that we have, mineral rights are owned by private citizens that don't take it for granted. It's a huge deal. We have lots of equipment, 100 years of doing this already, lots of infrastructure. And so those are huge challenges you see in Poland, Lithuania, the UK now. But more importantly, even in China, there's now protesting against fracking. So if most folks think China and the environment's not two words you put together, right? But the reality is there people there are now concerned about fracking. And again, they have a lot of resources, no doubt about it. But are they going to be able to compete at the level we compete at? Probably not. I don't know any other country I've been to that has all the moving parts that you can assemble together to make replicate what happened in America. And the biggest challenge you find is that citizens don't own the mineral rights. They don't want you coming on their land. They have no incentive to let you on their land. And so, you not in my backyard in NB, that's a huge deal in most of these countries. More importantly, you think about the anti-fracking movement. Now it's worldwide, for sure. And the only reason, quite frankly, that people here accept fracking in lots of places because they're incentivized to do so, right? And so, people have skin in the game. And the only country that's got sort of a movement on that is the UK. They're now giving each community 100,000 pounds and 1% of the revenue from each shale gas or shale oil well that's drilled there. So is it enough? Probably not. Is it a start? Absolutely it is. So no, I think that China has probably 50% more resources than we have, but they have a very small chance, I think, of accessing those and producing gas from shale. And if you notice the last round of concessions that were given out to China, 14 companies bid and won concessions. They're all small. The big three did not participate in the last round of concessions for land access. So, kind of gives you an insight that the big three are getting a bit not concerned, but I guess their attention is getting refocused back on coal bed methane or offshore drilling. So, if you give out all the resources to small companies that have no experience doing it and have no money, this is going to get slower, not go faster. So, I think the concern is that the cost of these wells, the access to the infrastructure, and I think the limited success that they've had. I think Beijing is starting to realize that maybe their attention is going to refocus on something different. And so I don't think that we'll see another country have the success we've had. Maybe Australia with CPM or unconventionals, but I don't think with shale it's going to be able to be replicated in the manner we had. And that's going to be tough for a lot of us.
So, Carolyn, you were nodding during that, so I want to give you an opportunity to respond. And apparently we're having some mic issues, so that's right.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'd like to just reiterate what Chris has said. I think that the United States has had a very unique place and advantage in terms of the shale revolution. In terms of mineral rights, in terms of, the pioneers that really made the shale revolution happen here in the United States, which is really cannot be found anywhere else. So I think that the unique competitive advantage here really has made a difference. I think it is important, though, to say that, outside of the United States, there are over 6,500 technically recoverable reserves globally. Many in China, Australia, South Africa, Argentina is a big player. However, I don't know if you are a foreign company, how much sort of confidence are you going to have going into Argentina, given its sort of investment history? So I think these are all sort of important things to remember. Again, I think the United States is just an extraordinary story. It's upended the whole energy narrative from a geopolitical perspective. I think it's, we're talking about shale oil. If we didn't have the shale oil sort of that's come out of the United States since 2008, we probably would have much higher oil prices, given the events that are happening right now in Iraq. I think shale oil has provided a level of sort of a price cushion, so that's provided some economic security here in the United States and globally. But as I said, I think that there's also some tremendous opportunity here for the United States with regards to energy statecraft. This is something that Elizabeth Rosenberg, who's at the Center for New American Security, really, I think, addresses beautifully in terms of, this is an opportunity for the United States to sort of use its experience in energy in terms of its foreign policy, in terms of working with China, working with other countries, and not to see the developments in other countries as a threat, but as a possibility for sort of greater security within the larger energy markets.
Absolutely. I'm going to pass it on to Branko. You brought up the kind of advantages of regulatory certainty that we have in the U.S., and that's definitely been the case with mineral rights. As we move into a phase of doing more infrastructure work, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is going to be a huge part of that. Branko, you used to sit on that commission. Could you talk a little bit about what you see as far as the midstream going forward?
Yes, as you remember, the FERC regulates interstate natural gas pipelines. It also regulates interstate oil pipelines, and it regulates LNG facilities, all of which are very critical right now for the development of natural gas. There is, in some recent studies, there's over by the INGA, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, which is the pipeline group, there's over $205 billion of new natural gas infrastructure being planned between now and 2035. The bulk of that is in mainline pipelines and in compression. There's still quite a bit in gathering. One of the benefits that Chris alluded to but didn't specify that we have here is the Marcellus field lies right underneath a huge network of natural gas pipelines that was built that I used when I was CEO of Yankee Gas in Connecticut to bring gas from the Gulf of Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma all the way to Connecticut. Now, not only is the price of natural gas lower, but the pipeline route is from Pennsylvania to Connecticut. So the Northeast here is benefiting not only from a lower price of the supply of gas, but it's benefiting from the close location and the existence of both gathering and some gathering and the existence of major pipeline facilities. So here in the Northeast, we have pipeline facilities. We need more, particularly bringing more competition. There's more gathering that's needed, as you've heard about flaring. Well, nobody wants to flare a valuable product such as methane. You want to sell that, and you get $4 an MMBTU for it, but you need both the quantity of it and you need the gathering system out to it. And so those will be coming. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission back in 1992 restructured the natural gas pipeline industry with Order 636, adding tremendous flexibility, adding straight fixed variable pricing, allowing the system to be used for storage, allowing segments of the system to be broken off. So we have probably the most flexible and the most attractive to investors pipeline regime that you have anywhere in the world.
Thanks. Joe, you're kind of at the forefront of this transition process that Branko alluded to here in the New York area. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about what you've been up to. We were talking about it earlier, and how this transitions from a kind of centralized pipeline infrastructure to the future is going.
So I would concur. I agree with you in terms of your narrative of innovation and impact versus implementation integration. I agree with that. I think 2008, 2009 till this past year has been really pioneers going out into the space, creating access to the supply. It's a well-oiled, well-operated machine now. It's almost like a factory operation. Get onto the site, set up the rigs, get the water, get the sand, get everything on there. And they've gotten it down to the smallest microcosm, to the smallest penny, and they've done a great job of that. Now it's really on the demand side to be able to take on that supply, that discounted energy, and find a home for it. And so that's what we've been doing here. We've been focusing on conversions, fuel conversions. So that would apply to steam generation, power generation, and specifically oil to gas conversions in New York City. So we have one division who focuses, we're very customer focused. We're not a technology company. So we're technology neutral. We're ironically fuel neutral, but because we're a customer-based company, our primary care is the customer's pocketbook, which right now natural gas is the largest single, most impactful solution that you can supply to the customer. So whether it's CNG, we have a transportation division, CNG, LNG, whether it's off-site, off-road, and then the buildings themselves, the boiler conversions. So that's how we've approached it.
Interesting. Could you just put into perspective, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was the oil to gas conversion market, and before we get too far into other subjects, as long as we have you, what is the kind of scale of the oil to gas conversion market? How much of an opportunity is this not only for local operators, people doing the work here, but also for the natural gas supply sector?
So a scale I would put into two categories. I mean, scale is first the consumption levels, and then I would put the economic impact question. The scale, there were, as of 3 years ago, roughly 8,000 buildings in New York City that were on 4 and 6 oil, which is considered the resids, the heavy oils. By numerous calculations, our own internals, by also DEP and ICF, it's close to about 493, 498 million gallons per year in terms of their consumption. So if you convert that all to natural gas, which obviously does not happen overnight, there's infrastructure, there's utilities, there's public pensions to get through, but there's a lot of hurdles. But if they all hypothetically would have converted, you're talking about roughly 0.8 BCF a day in terms of volume that's coming on in terms of peak capacity, which is obviously Spectra itself is 0.8 BCF. So, if you figure 5-10 years out, that pipe could actually get full. in terms of the economic impact, the economic it's insane. I mean, you have we hired a welder, fresh. I don't use that term. Newly immigrated, and he's 22 years old from Dominican Republic. He's been welding since he was 16, and he's making almost $100,000 this year in New York City. And you're looking for trades, skilled workers. You're looking for tradesmen. You're looking for wherever you can get your hands on engineers, project managers, and the economic boom is just tremendous.
Sure. So that 0.8 BCF number is interesting. The numbers that have been forecast for exports are substantially larger than that. So, Chris, I know you've spoken about exports before. Maybe you could talk about both the natural gas side and potentially, currently, I don't know if this is widely known, crude exports are not allowed to be exported from crude oil is not allowed to be exported from the United States except for Alaska. And that's been the case since the late 70s. And it made a certain degree of sense. It was kind of a moot point as we begin to move to a time when the mix of oil production is changing. There's potentially more in the U.S. How does that debate pertain? How do you see that debate going forward, and how does it kind of pertain to the broader issue of energy exports?
Look, so you're right. We can't export crude oil. It's been banned now since the 70s. I think that conversation is gathering steam. I think that President Obama made a comment that they would be addressing or looking at the crude export ban. There are big challenges coming forward if we do not look at exporting oil, because a lot of the refineries in the United States are obviously geared for heavy sour, and we have light sweet crude now coming out of these areas, the Permian Basin, the Bakken, et cetera. So there was a telltale sign, I thought, in September of last year where Louisiana light sweet crude glided up in the coast, and we were having to discount LLS by about $12 off of Brent because refineries were at capacity and they didn't want the additional oil. So as a producer, you have two choices. You can either leave it in the ground or you can discount it if they don't need it or don't want it. But the problem is that if this is expensive oil to produce, right? So if let's just say $50 a barrel, $55 a barrel in some areas, whereas many countries have cheap oil to produce, we do not. So if you have oil prices now at $106 for a barrel of oil, obviously this works pretty well. But if you have oil prices coming down, and most folks think once we have these issues, it seems like every year we talk about issues going away in the Middle East and geopolitics of whatever, and that story continues now for 50 years. But if oil prices come down, say in the 80s, we have to discount the oil because of refinery mismatch or because of a glut because we can't export oil. Now you're talking about oil being discounted. Now transportation in the Bakken is another $10 to $12 a barrel. So those two things can make the economics difficult in that environment. So I think the United States will export oil, but I think you have all the refineries don't want you to export oil, right? They want cheap feedstock. I get that. So the debate on their side is no, can't export crude oil. As a producer's side, at some point, we could get to a level. I mean, let's just say we get above 10 million barrels a day. We're at 8.6 now. There are countries that want our oil, and if the reality is that every commodity in the world can be traded anywhere in the world except for one, in the United States. So it's very difficult. I think LNG, obviously, we're probably 18 months away from exporting LNG in a meaningful way. Most folks say, well, there's concerns that the president will cap it, he'll tax it, he'll do whatever if the price of natural gas begins to rise. But our models don't show that the level of natural gas we can export will impact the price in a meaningful way. We're talking about 50 cents, 80 cents per 1,000 cubic foot. So I think that the president currently enjoys cheap natural gas, and every American enjoys cheap natural gas for power generation and for manufacturing now coming back to the United States. Jobs are coming back. So that's a great thing. But most concerns are if you export a lot of natural gas, will the price go up? Our model shows that the price won't move that much. So I think the United States is on a great path, right? Oil production's up 18% over last year. But if we can't export crude oil, I think there might be, within the next couple of years, some concern about what's going to happen if it gluts up in the price, et cetera. So interesting environment we're operating right now.
Absolutely. Let's go to Branko. You had a comment on that.
Yeah, just to add to that, my former colleagues at Deloitte did two studies on the impact of U.S. LNG exports. One study was the impact on domestic prices, and they found at the 6 BCF level about 14 cents positive. The other study is the impact of U.S. LNG exports on international markets. The two international markets, of course, are Asia, where natural gas has been trading at, I don't know, $17 versus the European market, where natural gas is at the $10, $11 level. There, they have already been impacted. When I was a FERC commissioner toward the end of my term, there were 26 applications for natural gas import terminals to the United States. That was only, 15 years ago or so. We had 26 applications to import natural gas. This shale revolution has been such that we have about 30 some, I guess, applications to export natural gas. Not all of those will be developed. The Deloitte studies show that the U.S. will not capture the entire global LNG ocean trade. There are lower cost supplies from Qatar, Trinidad, Tobago, the Australian supplies. We will capture some of that market, but we're not going to capture all of that market. And so we think there's a natural cap of how big can U.S. LNG exports be. And it'll be a while before there's enough transit to equalize prices. There are about 11,127 about. How's that for an about? I'm looking at a slide from another colleague. Crude oil tankers, 11,127 crude oil tankers that can move oil between higher prices and lower price areas. There are 298 LNG tankers currently. And so it's a long way to go before LNG trade will equalize markets, even though we're already impacting markets by displacement, where Qatari gas originally coming to the U.S. has been going to Europe. Remember, the European gas, some of it is indexed against petroleum. Our North American market gas has never been indexed against oil. It's actually moved separately from oil, and we've got a tremendous discount on a BTU value. And so it'll be a long time before we'll have a real global LNG market. Even so, we ought to export. One thing I thought Chris was going to mention, we can export refined gas products. And the increase in gasoline export has been a factor of 10. Over the last few years. We are now exporting, I think, equivalent to 6 million barrels a day or something of refined products. So the notion that we shouldn't export oil to keep it for ourselves while we're exporting gasoline makes no sense whatsoever. Right? It just makes no sense. We're exporting gasoline, which is what we put in our vehicles, and we're not going to export crude oil so that, we would have crude oil for gasoline? Doesn't make any sense. So clearly there's no argument to not export oil.
Carolyn, we've talked before about the kind of use of energy, U.S. energy, as a geopolitical tool, and I think you've seen that this year for the first time in a really sort of clear fashion. I mean, obviously, access to energy has been a huge part of U.S. foreign policy and commercial policy for years. And a lot of the costs that Chris alluded to are not necessarily always included in the oil price. They're included in the Pentagon budget, too. Everything that's happened in Ukraine this year. I mean, we've seen energy become a kind of almost a coin of the realm, if you like, in geopolitics. I wonder what your take on that is going forward. And if the U.S. changes its export policy, what then?
Well, I'm of the opinion, I think I share Chris and Bronco, that the U.S. should export. I think we should have an unencumbered market. I think that the policies that restrict the exports, they're old. They were from a very different period in terms of the energy landscape. If you look back to the 1970s, we're in a very different market. We're in a very different sort of geopolitical landscape. I think when the events in Ukraine, I mean, many people were calling for, in terms of U.S. foreign policy action, that we should be exporting LNG. We should be providing the European market with gas. That would be an alternative to the 30% of gas that they get from Russia. So I think we're hearing much more about how we can use our abundant energy in sort of very strategic ways. And I think that that's very important to sort of think about. And rather than sort of the United States sort of thinking in more isolationist policies in terms of as Bronco pointed out, in terms of that we need to sort of keep our oil and we need to keep our gas. And I also heard from the McKinsey study in terms of that they're looking at a relatively negligible price increase on gas if we should sort of export more of it. So, and when, look at the events, as I pointed out earlier, in terms of Iraq, I think that the United States, being in the position that it is, is providing some sort of global price security to some degree. I think we should be a little bit more creative in terms of how we approach our energy policy. I think also looking forward, I think the United States is a case, and I think other countries will follow as more countries move to gas. And they're doing so for a number of reasons. It's here in the United States, it's cheaper, but it's also sort of less carbon intensive. So as the move for carbon reduction in terms of climate change, gas makes a lot of sense. We've seen reductions here in the United States, pretty significant, without a sort of a large sort of climate program, without cap and trade. And I think other countries such as China that are so reliant on coal, and as Chris pointed out, that the environment has become a really striking issue for the Chinese. And when you look at protests in China, most of them revolve around environmental issues. So it's in China's interest to reduce coal, and as part of their last 5-year plan. So I think the United States is in a unique position to share the technology, to share sort of the know-how that we've gained, and the long history, as you pointed out in the introduction, to use it more strategically in terms of foreign policy.
I mean, on the topic of LNG, I think it's important to remember that natural gas is really, there's this dichotomy. In the East, there's natural gas as a product. In the Bakken, it's almost a byproduct, right? And that's why you have the flaring issues. Because of all the infrastructure, again, going back to your theme, implementation, because of all the infrastructure advancements, the entrepreneurship that's going on within that space, I mean, the most exciting things that we see right now are not necessarily related to LNG exports, but more related to LNG technologies being changed within the North American continent. So we're seeing a mobilization of the fuel. We're seeing virtual pipelines being created. We're seeing off-road, off-pipeline solutions for customers. And I think really that's the key, going back to the infrastructure theme, that you have entrepreneurs out there hitting the pavement saying, how can I take this waste byproduct, obviously, again, specifically to certain locales, but how can I take this product that's worth zero, liquefy it, transport it, find the customer, implement the solution? And I think that's really where the exciting stuff's happening right now in terms of LNG.
Could you talk a little about the idea of an off-pipeline solution? What does that mean?
So there's a really good case study of a paper mill, I believe, in either southern Vermont or southern New Hampshire, called Omya, O-M-Y-A. They were about 60 miles from the nearest pipeline. Their paper mill plant ran on distillate, number 2 oil. They were evaluating switching off of diesel from a start off 4 or 5 years ago from a green perspective, from a marketing perspective. And they approached the local LDC. I don't know who the local LDC up there is. Maybe Bronco knows. I don't know. And it was equivalently, basically $1 million a mile to extend the pipe. And they looked at the economics of paying for that extension, paying the utility to build that pipe versus implementing their own solution. And they retrofitted their 2 boilers, brought in liquefied natural gas, created a storage plant on site to hold the LNG, and the natural burn rate or vent rate off of an LNG storage is very appropriate for a boiler plant. And they were able to run their boiler plants off of natural gas for effectively $14, $15 all in with transportation per MMBTU versus $24 an MMBTU versus what they're paying on distillate 2 oil. So that's the kind of off-road, off-pipe.
I see.
In terms of when people say off-road, they typically mean high horsepower engines for fracking sites, the Caterpillars. There's a lot of technologies now in terms of biofuel, dual fuel, and then dedicated natural gas engines. Caterpillar's really been tremendous in that area.
Sure. Chris, talking about sort of your operating in an area that doesn't have amazing pipeline infrastructure to get that product out.
Right.
How do you see, as we move to as the demand side grows really rapidly, more and more engines are running on natural gas, more and more transport is running on natural gas. Almost every new power plant that's been built in the past decade runs on natural gas. What kind of challenges do you face? Do you expect that problem to get solved in the traditional way of building a great big pipe, or do you expect something more innovative?
Look, so yeah, we operate in the Bakken, and there's huge challenges with infrastructure up there. No question about it. I think the last stat that came out was about $1 billion a year of natural gas is being flared, being wasted. So, and keep in mind, while we have 100 years worth of history of energy in this country, there's still infrastructure challenges. And folks that live in this area know last winter, the capacity issues caused the price of natural gas, spot pricing to go to $130 per 1,000 cubic foot, which is, roughly, 40 times what NYMEX was at as far as the price of natural gas because of capacity issues. We've had reverse pipelines, because keep in mind, 100 years ago, in the last 100 years, we produced oil and natural gas in the West, and we shipped it to the East, and things have changed, right? So we have issues in this country with capacity and with infrastructure as well, and we're working through those. And there's, as I think Bronco mentioned the stat, there's a huge amount of infrastructure that's underway or being built now in this country, but there are still challenges in certain areas where, like Joe said, it's a byproduct. Natural gas. You go to China and you tell someone in China that you guys, we're wasting $1 billion a year worth of natural gas in one state, and they look at you like you're crazy. You go to UK and they're like, what? What are you doing? Because we're after liquids in that area. We're after oil, and so we flare the gas and we move on. But I think that this war on coal that President Obama has sort of dictated now, I think is bringing natural gas to the forefront of this country's mind, if you will. And I think it's bringing awareness to the fact that we are moving quickly away from coal for power generation. Now, the challenge that we have is that, this is not a United States issue, it's a global issue, right? You go to India and you tell them you're going to move away from coal, and they tell you basically to get lost because it's not going to happen. And you go to China, and while they want to migrate toward natural gas, they're adding new coal power plants every week. And so, that's a huge challenge. And you think about just in the United States alone, by 2030, President Obama wants to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from power generation by 30%. That means that by 2030, we have to displace or turn off 46% of all the coal power generation in this country. It's a very aggressive target, but I think it makes a statement about what this country is migrating toward, right? The reality is we have 100 years worth of natural gas. Unfortunately, a lot of it's in places where it doesn't need to be, and we have issues getting it to where it needs to be. But I think that that's getting resolved, and I think that we're moving in the right direction. Keep in mind, this happened so very rapidly, what happened in the United States, and we're still playing catch up for that. Keep in mind, this sounds crazy, but we, ship oil out of the Bakken on a train, and this is 2014, right? So it seems like we're having to play catch up in a lot of areas. But keep in mind, also, there's a lot of good that came with this, and it came very, very rapidly. So yeah, I think things are changing. But when you pay $140 for natural gas in the winter in the Northeast, that says a lot about where we still have a long way to go.
Sure. Right. You ran one of those companies that was moving and using that natural gas. I'd love to hear your take on how the local regions, just bring it back to New York, what we're looking at here, and what are the big issues about that transition.
Yeah, there's a curious situation. I was running a large natural gas LDC company in Connecticut, and we were just then starting to build more natural gas power plants. And somebody asked me at a press conference or at an annual shareholders meeting, isn't that a great benefit to Yankee Gas that we're building natural gas powered electric generating stations? And I said, there's no benefit at all. As a matter of fact, there's a detriment. And the issue, of course, is that the large electric power plants don't connect to the LDC. They connect to the interstate pipelines. And in our country, those are separately owned. The interstate pipelines have a separate history than local distribution gas companies, which we remember started making gas out of coal, town gas. We've got natural gas, we've got cities here in the Northeast where town gas was introduced in the 1840s. Okay, so the pipeline network is separate, came after World War II. And what we have then, now we've got competition between the LDCs and the electric power plants basically for pipeline capacity. There is not enough storage, market area storage up here for natural gas. Yankee built an LNG facility, not an import facility, but a facility to buy natural gas in the summer, liquefy it, and then use it in the winter because our predominant customers are heating their homes or heating their businesses. And so now we're competing in the summer for LNG, for natural gas that normally northeastern utilities would put into storage, but now that's going into electric power plants for the peak air conditioning season. So we have some problems, some compatibility problems in the Northeast between the different usage patterns and the lack of storage of natural gas. If you have a coal-fired power plant, yes, you pollute more, but if the coal train doesn't get there, you've got 90 days, 60, 90-day supply of coal sitting to run that plant. The lights don't go out. You've got a natural gas pipeline, and you're curtailed. As First Energy was told, the CEO was told that this summer, First Energy's Ohio electric company, they would not get natural gas for their power plants because it has to go into storage for the LDCs. That's creating a problem. So we need more capacity. We need more storage. We probably need some lines coming from different directions, maybe even in Canada, bringing gas, even U.S. gas through Canada. But the Northeast needs more pipeline and it needs more storage capacity.
Okay, so we've hit just past 9:15. We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we answer some of the audience questions. I just want to say I love the fact that an oil and gas breakfast at 8 a.m. downtown on a beautiful day is standing room only. That's fabulous.
So I wanted to play maybe devil's advocate.
Maybe if you could just identify yourself quickly.
Yes, sir. My name's Sakib Rahim. I'm a reporter with EnergyWire.
Please.
So I want to play devil's advocate a little bit on what appears to be a unanimous view that exports of oil are sensible for the country. Okay, so this is just for entertainment's sake. So, perhaps a devil's advocate could say to you, we don't know that basically oil exports would bet on the longevity of the shale oil productivity revolution, right? So now you're making a bet that we can continue to do this for a long time. Safe bet on gas, maybe a little bit more murky on oil. You could also make the bet, as Goldman Sachs was saying in a report last week, that if you keep the oil in this country and you say you're going to do that, then you can potentially enable a whole new set of infrastructural investments, like in refineries, right? Or you can show the Canadian market that we're going to send the oil up there, and you make that investment in North America. So could someone make a credible argument to you? Do you think there's a sensible argument on the other side?
Look, I think that there's definitely an argument. There's a couple of challenges that we have to deal with in the United States. Number one is the reality is we're exporting tons of distillate fuels. It's up 600% in the last 2 years. There are many refineries that are popping up around the Gulf Coast where they're refining crude oil just enough to make it not crude oil and shipping that offshore. So it's already occurring. But look, most models show that the shale revolution and this increase, by the end of this decade starts to plateau. Some models do. I don't agree with that model, but there are models that many investment bankers produce, Raymond James, for example. The reality is 1,900 rigs are drilling in the United States right now. It's a very, very expensive game to continue, right? You mentioned before, it's almost like a manufacturing process now. I call it the drilling treadmill. The treadmill has to continue nonstop because these wells decline very, very rapidly. 80% of the production is gone by year 3, right? There's a huge tail that we now know about, but the hyperbolic decline moves very, very rapidly. If you do not continue drilling, this whole thing stops rapidly. So yeah, I think, the biggest argument that I get about crude oil exports is that, the price of gasoline is going to go to $6, a gallon. Well, we've been shipping gasoline and diesel, for the last 18 months, and the price hasn't really moved that much. That's the biggest argument that you hear is, $6, $8 gasoline. So everyone freaks out and says, no, we don't want to export crude oil. But I think that here's what's going to happen if we have a glut of oil. What's going to happen is millions of Americans who are supported by this industry will no longer be supported by it. It's going to slow everything down. And the whole idea that we can be energy independent, whether you believe that or not, it's possible, and that is out the window. So if we have an issue where oil prices come down, say in the 80s, and we're still discounting because of glut, or we're still having to pay $12 to transport a barrel of oil by train in the Bakken, then that whole thing becomes uneconomical, right? So the reality is, if we want to continue with the idea of energy independence, we want to be self-sufficient, whatever you believe, then we have to either have a high oil price, or we've got to be able to move oil where it needs to go, and maybe that's out of this country. That's going to happen. So, but I think there's significant challenges to that, because most Americans believe that if we're producing 8.6 million barrels a day and we're using 13 million, why would we be shipping crude oil to other countries if we still need, oil for this country? So I think there's significant challenges to that. Also, keep in mind that most people still realize that, these laws are from 50 years ago, and a whole different era has changed from scarcity and fear when they were put in place now to abundance and a different situation. But I think to get America mindset to think, okay, let's be a crude oil exporter, I think it's going to be a challenge. But I hope that now be exporting LNG or natural gas, I hope that will start people moving in the right direction as far as mentality. But I would be very, very hard pressed to think this precedent is going to allow us to export crude oil. And so that means 2.5 more years of waiting around. But what happened in September of last year, is scary, because we saw refineries pushing back, and we had oil that was not being utilized and being heavily discounted. And that's a big challenge as a producer, for sure.
Just to continue his question, you mentioned Canada. I think actually looking at the North American sector, Mexico, U.S., Canada, you have 3 huge producers. Carolyn, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the North American energy island or whatever?
Well, I mean, I think one of the big things now is, Mexico has in place, some very significant reforms of their energy sector. So there are some, interesting opportunities in terms of for an increase in production. In terms of, Mexico has sort of been on the decline, but much of that is the result of, lack of investment and poor infrastructure. But as, the Mexican market and as the energy market is reformed, I think there are some interesting opportunities. Canada, I do a lot of work with Canada. In fact, I took a group of students up to Alberta a couple of years ago, and the Canadian energy landscape has also changed dramatically. I think there's tremendous frustration on the part of the Canadians that the United States has not okayed Keystone, and of course that gets into a number of issues. But Canada has historically looked at the U.S. as its primary market. It is no longer thinking of only the United States. They are really looking at other markets, Asia being the most significant one. In terms of the price differential. So, yeah, I think North America is a phenomenal story, though. When you take Mexico, the United States, and Canada as a whole, and you look at, the increase in production over the last 6 years, it's amazing. Much of it coming from the United States. However, there are some, I think, interesting opportunities for Mexico, and I think, Canada is. They're much more sort of inclined to sort of think about the global market as opposed to just thinking about the U.S. market, and that's a result of they need to get their oil to market, and they're going to make that happen.
Sir?
Bronco, I wanted to respond to a comment you made on the U.S. needs more storage. Current winter-summer spreads in both Texas and the Midwest are close to zero. and storage is available for almost cost, because there's just really no transmission to get the gas from the Marcellus over there. Isn't really what we need more pipelines to get the gas to the storage areas?
Well, Texas storage wouldn't be market area storage, right? It'd be supply storage. So I'm thinking more the market area storage in Connecticut, New Hampshire, up in New York, these areas up here. Yes, we do need more pipeline capacity. That's absolutely clear.
Hi, I'm Mark Rosenblatt at something called the Fuel Freedom Foundation. I want to respond to the export question, which is, why would we import oil at all at $100 a barrel and then export natural gas at the $25 equivalent on energy? It just sounds like a bad idea. And that's what a lot of this is based on. And the reason is because there's no elasticity between gas and oil. So we really don't have one market, two markets. So I want to ask the panel to respond to, how do you recreate elasticity between those markets? Because then the price of gas would go up, price of oil would go down. We don't have a free market. We have a ton of natural gas right now.
Yeah, so of course the difference is the issue of energy density. Gasoline is a dense energy fuel, 15 times the energy in a gallon of gasoline than equivalent volume of TNT. People just forget how convenient gasoline is. Therefore, it's used exclusively for transportation. Natural gas in a pipeline, low energy density. The transition, of course, is Sassoil. Sassoil's got a $2 billion bet to go gas to liquids. So they're building a major facility in Louisiana to build a natural gas facility that'll take natural gas and convert it to a liquid product. And I think that's where the bet is. That's where the money is being bet, that there'll be that difference will remain because of the convenience factor. And there's a good example of what you're saying, I think.
I think it's a great example. I think there are other things besides Sassoil. I think that if you look at the China example right now, you'll see of the 110, 120 million cars in China, about 30 million of them are today running on a methanol gasoline mix because of price. And the energy density of methanol being around 60% of gasoline doesn't seem to matter compared to the price difference. So the consumer is very willing to go fill up once every 5 days instead of once every 7 days, compared to the price difference between methanol and gasoline.
And Joe, we had talked a little bit about transport and how natural gas is going into more transport options. Do you want to talk a little bit about how those markets could...
I mean, compression technologies have really advanced tremendously. It's very much based upon locales, mostly because, like Bronco can attest, for example, New York City CNG, the effective cost per gallon, if let's say we have a customer who has his own fleet of trucks, he wants us to contract with us to build him a CNG plant, CNG fueling station. You know, he's looking at anywhere between $1.80 to $2.10 a gallon, depending on how he compresses, depends on the type of equipment he puts in. The reason is natural gas is, you know, everyone, I think in this audience thinks of natural gas as $4 an MMBTU. But the reality is for every ratepayer, for every customer, once it crosses the LDC city gate, it jumps by about $5 minimum. I'm just gonna say minimum. Typically, it jumps about $5. So the customer is looking at all in typically $9, $10 an MMBTU for their gas. Add in the compression, there is economics. There's tremendous economics, but for example, CNG in Oklahoma is the effective cost is closer to $1.20 a gallon versus, you know, the $1.80 to $2.10 that we're paying up here.
Let me just point out on the biofuels, 40 acres of wheat. That's the wheat, the seed, the stalks, all of it is about 90 tons of plant life. That's about energy equivalent of 1 gallon of gasoline. So if you're going to go the biofuels, you're going to be eating a lot of acreage that might be doing something else for food production. Now, this country at the turn of the last century, 27% of our farmland was devoted to transportation. It was in 1905, it was making oats and hay for horses. So we have used quite a bit. You know, at one time we did rely on solar biofuels for transportation, but I think to do it in the future, we have other issues.
I also think we're presented with a unique opportunity here. You have you have a scenario where the economics themselves incentivize customers to switch. When you have biofuels, everything is specific to each investment, each asset, each product, but there's so much tax incentives. There's so much political, I guess, support to encourage these projects to get built and constructed, maintained, and pushed to market that I'm very weary of that level of investment. Solar, people have invested in solar. Peter probably knows a lot about solar. You know, the idea was if they create the incentives, the entrepreneurs can get in there and then can bring the cost of the materials down, the cost of installations down. Ethanol, they've now been at it for, I mean, Chris probably knows longer, but they've been at it for a long time. The economics on their own are not there. It's really a function of the tax rebates, the tax incentives, accelerated depreciation for a profitable company.
And that brings us to so many of the issues we're actually going to cover later in the week in a lot of these different panels that we'll be covering. And we've hit 9:30, and so I want to give you all time to network and speak with our panelists individually. And if we could just thank them.